The same quiet man can be experienced in two completely different ways. In one situation, his silence might seem distant or difficult to read. In another, that same restraint can come across as confidence, self-possession, or simply a kind of presence that makes people pay closer attention. What changes is not always the amount he talks. Sometimes it is the meaning other people attach to what he does when he doesn't feel the need to fill every moment. That is what makes attraction around quiet men more interesting than the usual idea that being quiet is either a strength or a weakness. Quietness itself does not make someone attractive. A man can be quiet because he is thoughtful, because he is comfortable, because he is anxious, because he has nothing to say, or because he is intentionally holding back. Those experiences may look similar from the outside, but they can create very different impressions. And this connects naturally with the idea of emotional safety. When a person feels less pressure around someone, they may become more comfortable being themselves. Once that happens, perception can begin to change. The person is no longer simply noticing that the man talks less. They are experiencing the way he occupies the interaction. That distinction matters because attraction is rarely created by one isolated behavior. It develops through interpretation. A behavior becomes meaningful because of what it seems to communicate about the person behind it. For a quiet man, that can work in ways he may not even notice. Imagine being in a conversation where someone makes a comment that could easily invite a defensive response. One person immediately starts explaining himself, correcting the impression, or trying to make sure everyone understands what he meant. Another person pauses, considers it, and responds without appearing desperate to control how he is being perceived. The difference can be subtle. Neither person necessarily has more confidence than the other. But the second interaction may feel different because there is less visible urgency. People are constantly interpreting behavior for clues about another person's internal state. A response that appears measured can suggest that the person is comfortable enough to take a moment before reacting. That does not prove confidence, and it certainly does not guarantee attraction, but it can influence perception. Quiet men sometimes underestimate this because they are comparing themselves with louder personalities. They see someone who tells stories easily, jokes constantly, enters conversations without hesitation, and seems socially effortless. From the inside, the quieter man may feel as though he is contributing less. Yet, attraction is not a competition over who produces the most social energy. Someone can be memorable because of what they add to an interaction, but they can also become memorable because of the quality of their attention, the steadiness of their reactions, and the feeling that they are not performing every second. That is a different kind of social presence. Consider a simple conversation. A woman is talking about something that matters to her, and the man across from her does not immediately turn the subject back toward himself. He listens, responds to what she actually said, and lets the conversation develop rather than rushing to demonstrate how interesting he is. There is nothing dramatic about that moment, but the experience can be surprisingly meaningful. When someone feels genuinely heard, the interaction can become easier to stay inside. There is less need to compete for attention, less need to perform, less uncertainty about whether the other person is waiting for an opening to talk about himself. That does not mean quiet men automatically listen better. Some quiet people are deeply attentive, while others are simply disengaged. The important factor is not silence itself, it is what the silence contains. A quiet man who is mentally present can give an interaction a very different texture from a quiet man who is withdrawn from it. That is why the most attractive form of quietness is rarely passive. It has something happening underneath it. There is attention, there is response, there is awareness of the other person. The silence becomes part of the conversation rather than an absence from it. One of the strange things about social interaction is that effort can sometimes become visible even when someone is trying to hide it. You can sense when a person is desperate to be impressive. The conversation becomes crowded with achievements, stories, jokes, opinions, or subtle attempts to establish status. Again, none of those behaviors are inherently bad. Confidence can be expressive. Humor can create connection. Telling stories can make someone engaging. But when every moment seems to carry the question, "How am I being perceived?" the other person may feel that pressure too. A quieter man may sometimes create a different impression simply because he is less visibly occupied with managing the room. He may speak when he has something to contribute. He may disagree without turning disagreement into a performance. He may allow another person to have the spotlight without interpreting that as a loss of his own importance. When that behavior comes from genuine self-possession, it can communicate something quietly powerful. I don't need to dominate this interaction to feel secure inside it. That is very different from trying to appear mysterious. Mysteriousness is something a person can perform. Self-possession is more difficult to fake consistently because it shows up across ordinary moments. How someone handles disagreement, how he responds when he is misunderstood, how comfortable he is when attention moves away from him, and whether he can remain himself without constantly adjusting to the room. Those details accumulate. There is another reason quiet men may sometimes be more attractive than they realize. People do not always become curious because someone is withholding information. Sometimes, curiosity appears because there is genuine depth that has not yet been fully revealed. A person who speaks less may leave more of their inner world unseen at first. That can create room for another person to wonder what they think, what they care about, what makes them laugh, what they become passionate about when the right subject comes up. But there is an important difference between having depth and deliberately hiding it. If a man says almost nothing because he believes women will become fascinated by his silence, the interaction can quickly feel empty. Curiosity needs something to discover. Without warmth, responsiveness, personality, or meaningful communication, silence does not create depth. It simply creates distance. That is why quiet confidence is not about becoming harder to read. It is about being willing to be known without feeling obligated to reveal everything immediately. The distinction sounds small, but it changes the entire interpersonal experience. A man can be private without being closed. He can be reserved without being cold. He can be thoughtful without becoming passive. And he can be calm without turning calmness into a performance. That combination can make another person feel that there is more to him than what appears in the first few minutes. There is a temptation to talk about attraction as though there were a universal collection of traits that make someone desirable. Real relationships are much less predictable. Some people are drawn toward highly expressive personalities. Others appreciate calmness. Some enjoy constant conversation, while others find deeper connection in quieter interactions. Personality, context, culture, individual history, and compatibility all shape what someone experiences as attractive. So when we say quiet men can be more attractive than they realize, the useful question is not, why does every woman love a quiet man? There is no honest answer to that. The better question is, what can quiet behavior communicate when it is supported by healthy qualities? It can communicate that a person is comfortable listening. It can create a slower conversational pace. It may give someone room to express themselves. It can sometimes make emotional reactions easier to read because the man is not constantly filling the interaction with noise. And when those qualities fit what another person values, compatibility can become easier to recognize. This is an important shift for men who have spent years thinking they need to become louder to become more attractive. You may not need a completely different personality. You may need to understand what your existing personality communicates when it is expressed well. There is also a boundary worth understanding. Quietness can come from confidence, but it can also come from fear. The two can look surprisingly similar from a distance. A confident, quiet man might pause because he is considering his response. An insecure, quiet man might pause because he is terrified of saying the wrong thing. One may enjoy listening. The other may be mentally rehearsing what to say next. One may be comfortable with a little silence. The other may experience every pause as evidence that the interaction is going badly. From the outside, both might appear reserved. That is why simply becoming quieter is not a path toward confidence. Confidence develops more from becoming comfortable with yourself than from reducing your number of words. A quiet man who constantly monitors himself can actually create more tension than someone who speaks freely. The goal, then, is not silence. It is freedom. Freedom to speak when you have something to say. Freedom to listen without worrying about whether you are losing attention. Freedom to disagree without becoming defensive. Freedom to let another person be interesting without needing to compete. That kind of freedom changes the emotional quality of an interaction, and it is often much more attractive than an attempt to look impressive. There is one final piece that is easy to miss. Quiet men often evaluate themselves from the inside. They notice the thoughts they did not express, the joke they almost made, the moment when they hesitated, the conversation they could have handled better. They compare their internal experience with another person's visible confidence and conclude that they are somehow lacking. The other person does not have access to that internal commentary. She experiences what actually happened. Maybe he listened carefully. Maybe he stayed composed during an awkward moment. Maybe he remembered something she mentioned earlier. Maybe he responded thoughtfully instead of trying to impress her. Maybe she simply felt relaxed enough to stop monitoring herself. Those experiences can matter more than the quiet man realizes, because he may be measuring his attractiveness through his own effort rather than through the quality of the interaction. That is a useful distinction. Attraction is not only about what you display, it is also about what another person experiences in your presence. And because quiet men often underestimate behaviors that feel ordinary to them, they may overlook qualities that someone else finds meaningful. The man who thinks, "I didn't really do anything," may not realize that his restraint allowed the conversation to breathe. The man who thinks, "I wasn't very interesting," may not realize that he made another person feel interesting. The man who thinks, "I didn't say much," may be missing the fact that what he did say felt considered rather than automatic. None of this guarantees attraction. It simply explains why the same quiet behavior can carry more interpersonal value than the person displaying it may recognize. So, why can quiet men be more attractive than they realize? Not because quietness is a secret advantage, and not because talking less automatically creates attraction. The more useful explanation is that quiet behavior can sometimes communicate qualities that are easy to overlook from the inside: composure, attention, self-possession, room for another person to be themselves, and a sense that the interaction does not have to become a performance. When those qualities are genuine, they can shape perception. And perception matters because people do not experience personality as a list of traits. They experience a person through moments: how it feels to talk to him, how he reacts when something becomes uncomfortable, whether he seems present, whether there is room to be oneself around him, whether his quietness feels peaceful, thoughtful, distant, or uncertain. The difference is not simply how much he says. It is what his presence makes possible. For a quiet man, that can be encouraging. You do not necessarily need to become louder, more dominant, or more socially performative to become more attractive. Understanding your own temperament, developing genuine confidence within it, and learning how your behavior affects other people may be far more valuable than trying to imitate someone else's personality. And once you start looking at attraction that way, a more interesting question appears. What specific behavior can make a quiet man stay in someone's mind long after the conversation ends? That question takes the idea one step further, from attraction in the moment to the way certain interactions can leave a lasting impression. If you want to keep following that thread, the next lesson is the one thing quiet men do that women can't forget. And if you want the broader context, the psychology of attraction is where these ideas come together.